Hey everyone, I'm Angel. In 2025, a woman ended her own life in Australia. The news gave her maybe a few lines of space. Key Epstein witness dead by suicide, aged 41. On screen, you'd see her name, Virginia Roberts Giuffre. In most reports, she's the whistleblower, the face of the victims, the woman who accused a prince. In a few more days, new headlines will bury her, and she'll become just a key word in a database. But if you strip away all the labels, all the titles, before any of that, she was just a girl that almost nobody ever stood up for. This video isn't going to run through the flight logs. It isn't going to whitewash anyone either. What I want to do is something a little more uncomfortable. Rewind the clock and look at what was done to her before Epstein ever entered the picture. You're going to see how a child got badly hurt inside her own home, how she was sold for the first time on the street, how she got pulled in by a job that looked perfectly respectable, and how she ended up inside those mansions, becoming one of the names on that list. If you think this is just bad luck on her part, what's coming might force you to ask a different question.
Please go away.
Who, exactly, kept making sure she ended up standing right in front of predators again and again? Let's clear all the famous names off the screen first. Go back to the very beginning, just her and her family. Virginia was born in Florida. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary family. But for her, home wasn't a shelter. Home was where the damage started. She'd later say her childhood didn't really feel like a childhood at all. The house was chaotic. The adults were too busy with their own emotions, their own messes. Almost nobody ever stopped to ask her, "Hey, are you okay?" And here's the cruelest part. The first person to cross the line with her wasn't some outsider, not a stranger in a dark alley. It was someone inside her own world, an adult who was supposed to protect her. This is where you start to see the pattern that runs through almost every story of sexual exploitation. The harm begins with someone you know. The first thing they teach you is that saying no doesn't work. She learned the cruel rules fast. Your feelings don't matter. If you speak up, the adults will tell you to be quiet. And just because you're at home doesn't mean you're safe. To everyone outside, she slowly became that difficult kid. Skipping school, talking back, running away, drinking. Teachers, cops, social workers, all they saw was her behavior file. Nobody really asked, what's burning underneath all of this? Pick up almost any piece of research on child protection or trauma psychology, and you'll find the same thing. Kids who get hurt at home and never get rescued grow up far more likely to believe, I'm not worth anything, and far more likely to stay too long in relationships that aren't safe. Put plainly, from very early on, she was being trained by the system around her to be someone who's easy to use. And when a child reaches the point where staying home just means more pain, what happens next? She picked the option a lot of people would call reckless. She ran away. The moment she turned and walked out of that house, she thought she was escaping hell. What she didn't know was that as one door closed behind her, a much bigger one was slowly opening up ahead. The first day you run away from home almost always looks romantic. Nobody's enforcing a curfew. Nobody's yelling at you to clean your room. You get to decide where you go, who you're with. For Virginia, that stretch of time genuinely did feel a bit like freedom. She drifted through the streets, hung out with all kinds of people, filled every night with alcohol and impulse. But freedom comes with one condition. You have to actually survive. You need somewhere to sleep, food to eat, someone willing to take you to a doctor when you're sick. A teenage girl with no diploma, no family safety net, those are exactly the things she didn't have on the street. And right in the middle of that gap, she met him. Let's use his real name, Ronald Eppinger. You can find him in old news clippings and court documents, but in her life, the way he showed up was simple. He looked like a savior. He had more money than her. He had a place. He had a car. He spoke gently. He told her, "You shouldn't be sleeping in places like that. You deserve a better life." To a kid who'd been ignored her whole life, those words are more lethal than anything else. So she went with him. At first, he really did give her a lot of what she'd been missing: a bed, food, a sense of safety. But pretty quickly, the terms started to shift. He started deciding when she could leave the house, who she could meet, where she'd spend her nights. And then he started setting her up to meet other men. People would pay him to see her, and her body was wrapped up inside that transaction. In other words, before Epstein ever showed up, Virginia had already been trafficked once. And the cruelest part? This first time came dressed up as a boyfriend, a benefactor. When she finally got out from under this man, what she carried away with her wasn't just a pile of traumatic memories. She carried away 3 even more lethal beliefs. 1. As long as I have to depend on someone to survive, I don't get to say no. 2. When people see I'm vulnerable, their first instinct isn't to help. It's to take advantage. 3. Whenever money's involved, I'm always the chip on the table that gets swapped out first. Carrying those 3 beliefs, she went back to Florida. On the surface, it looked like her life was about to start over. She landed what seemed like a perfectly normal job, working in uniform at a world-class private club. This time, she thought she'd finally found somewhere a little safer. What she didn't know was that this place was called Mar-a-Lago, and the man who owned it was about to push her, once again, straight into the darkest corner of power itself. Back in Florida, her father was working at a private club. The place was called Mar-a-Lago. You've seen this name in the news. Donald Trump's private estate, his club, his power broker hangout. For a girl like Virginia, having family on the inside meant something very practical. She could get a job there too. And she did. Uniform, time clock, paycheck. On the surface, this was the most normal stretch of her entire life. There were security cameras, there was management, there were rules. She wasn't sleeping on strangers' couches anymore. She wasn't fully dependent on one man for her next meal. But a space full of power and a space that's actually safe, those are 2 completely different things. Who walked through the doors at Mar-a-Lago? Billionaires, politicians, celebrities, people whose names you'd recognize. The kind of people who are used to others smoothing the world out for them, used to treating everyone around them as background. And Virginia was part of that background. She was an entry-level employee, not a member, definitely not a guest. To a lot of powerful people, the staff exists to do exactly this. Hand over towels, carry drinks, clean things up. Not to be a complete human being who can say no. If you read various reports on Mar-a-Lago, you'll see the place described as an international power broker social hub. A space where heavyweight figures of every kind would show up under the same roof. Stack those images on top of each other and you start to see something painfully ironic. She'd finally clawed her way off the streets, only to be placed inside a higher class world that still wasn't hers. This place had security. It had iron gates. It had a membership system. It had everything, except one thing: an adult who would actually stand on her side. And in this place that looked safe, but was really just there to serve power, she met the next key figure in her story. Not a billionaire, not a president, a woman. Her name was Ghislaine Maxwell. From here on, the story gets more complicated, because this isn't a simple bad man versus helpless girl anymore. This is an entire network, patiently moving her toward the next trap. In most news coverage, Ghislaine Maxwell gets called socialite, Epstein's girlfriend, accomplice. She came from a wealthy, well-connected family, good education, moved freely through high society. A woman like that, walking into the life of a teenage girl on a tiny paycheck with a broken past, you can imagine the gulf. Maxwell wasn't holding a contract. She wasn't holding a knife. What she was holding was a smile, a story, and opportunity. She asked Virginia, "Have you ever thought about going back to school? Have you ever thought about earning more money, seeing more of the world?" The offer she laid out sounded completely respectable. Go through some professional massage training, give massages to a wealthy, generous gentleman, learn a real skill, earn some money, and there'd be more opportunities down the road. If you pull the camera back a little, you start to see a different picture. This isn't one adult strange kink. It's an entire network. It starts with girls like her, working low-paid jobs in places like this club, and stretches upward to a world of mansions, private jets, and offshore islands. The money and power of finance and politics. A lot of the names are ones you've seen in other headlines. Princes, presidents, tech billionaires, superstar lawyers, elite professors. Some invested with him, some raised money with him, some flew on his planes, some accepted invitations to his island. Not every one of them committed a crime. But the more of those connections you have wrapped around the edges, the harder the web is to see, and the harder it is to pull apart. Inside that web, Maxwell wasn't on the outskirts. She was the one making the handoffs. One hand on the door to high society, the other reaching for girls like Virginia, linking those two worlds together, and making sure only one side paid the price. For Virginia, these were words she'd almost never actually owned in her life. Education, a profession, a way out. She wasn't stupid, she just needed hope too badly. So she said yes. She agreed to go to a mansion, to a man named Jeffrey Epstein, to learn massage and do the work. In that moment, she thought she'd finally met an adult who would actually reach down and pull her up. What she didn't know was that this was a routine they'd already run many times before. She was just the latest one they'd picked. The real trap was waiting for her inside the mansion. The first time she walked into Epstein's house, What she saw was another world entirely. Massive rooms. The air conditioning cranked so cold it made you shiver. Expensive-looking art on the walls. Everything in that place was emphasizing the same thing. This man was rich enough that he didn't have to explain anything. At first, the whole thing was still packaged as a massage table, towels, essential oils. What happened next, she's laid out clearly in her own account. I'm not going to walk through every detail here. That's not the point. What actually matters is this. From that moment on, her identity inside this system was completely rewritten. She wasn't just a low-level employee at some club anymore. She wasn't just a girl some man had taken in. She had become something else. Something that could be scheduled, moved around, accounted for. An asset. Her time turned into a slot on a calendar that could be booked. Her body turned into a service that could be recommended to other people. And then one day, the request came down. Bring me more girls. At Mar-a-Lago in Florida, a teenage Virginia was introduced to a wealthy man who needed a masseuse. In a room of his house, she was asked, for the first time, to take her clothes off, and told, "This is just a kind of work." Very quickly, she found out it wasn't a job. It was a contract. Epstein told her, "I know where your brother goes to school, and I own the Palm Beach police." From that moment on, walking out was no longer an option. Around the year 2000, she was formally drawn into that world. She began to be taken to different places. Her name started appearing on more and more people's schedules. In her own account, she was no longer anybody's girlfriend. She had become an asset, someone who could be lent out, introduced, slotted into a calendar. Every flight, every city was the same job. The only thing that changed was who was sitting in the room that day. If you only looked at the names, you'd think this was a circle of well-connected celebrities. But in her telling, what you see is a machine with a very clear division of labor. Epstein was the man with his hand on the switch. The houses, the planes, the island, all in his name. The itineraries came from him. He decided who went where, how many girls would be brought in, which friend they were sent to. In her words, he is the one who said, "I own the police," and "I know where your family is." He is also the one who rewrote the word girl as asset. Maxwell was the one who brought people in and made it all look normal. Many of the girls came through her. Introductions from clubs, from dinners, from workplaces, brought into these mansions. She made sure everything looked like high society. Art on the walls, charity galas, photographs with famous people. Anyone watching from the outside would have thought this was simply how rich people lived. In Virginia's account, Maxwell was more than some rich man's girlfriend. She was a switchboard, one hand reaching toward vulnerable minors, the other opening doors for powerful men. Andrew was the guest, the name on the lists, the figure in the photographs. By her telling, he was not there every day. He was a name scheduled into a few evenings. Maxwell's London home, the New York mansion, the island of Little St. James. In his own account, he has denied any sexual contact with her, said he does not remember meeting her, and questioned the photograph. The case was settled out of court, an undisclosed sum, a statement acknowledging her as an established victim of abuse, but without any admission of liability. Whichever side you believe, the name stands for a different kind of role. Not the person who designed the system, but the person the system served. The class that could order service off the itinerary. By this point, the picture can be drawn as a simple triangle. One person who controlled the assets, one who recruited and dressed it up, and several others served by the machine, and themselves holders of power. Time moves forward. On the night Jeffrey Epstein died in prison in 2019, the surveillance cameras just happened to fail. The guards on duty just happened to fall asleep. Later, there were claims that someone who looked like him had been seen elsewhere. Different accounts began to overlap. In the official record, his status is death. But for many people, it feels more like he disappeared. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted. Large batches of documents, flight logs, and names were released, one after another. On April 25th, 2025, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide at the age of 41. A memoir she completed with journalist Amy Wallace, Nobody's Girl, was published that October as a posthumous work. That same year, consequences began to reach the royal side as well. On November 3rd, the king issued letters patent removing his Royal Highness and Prince titles. He is now referred to as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. In 2026, he moved out of Royal Lodge and into Wood Farm at Sandringham. From the outside, it looked like a gradual push toward the edges of the royal family. On his 66th birthday, he was taken in for questioning on suspicion of misconduct in public office, related to allegations that he passed confidential government documents to Epstein during his time as a UK trade envoy. The charge carries a potential life sentence. He is currently under investigation, and this line of inquiry is not legally connected to the sexual abuse allegations involving Giuffre. Only slowly did the world begin to understand. This was never something one individual could have built alone. This was a system. Some people participated directly. Some knew and chose not to act. Others used their expertise and their status to smooth things over, to sanitize, to manage the aftermath. And Virginia was just one of the names this machine ground beneath its wheels. At this point, it would be easy to end the story by saying they were finally held accountable. But if we stop there, then all of this becomes nothing more than a tragedy that happened somewhere else, to someone else. The harder question is this: before she was ever brought into those houses, was there a moment when someone could have stepped in? At home, at school, within social services, within the police, within the justice system. If even one of those points had held, even slightly, is it possible she would never have appeared on those schedules at all? In the Epstein case, the woman who stood up again and again was named Virginia Roberts Giuffre. You don't have to believe every word she said, but it's hard to look at this story and still see her as just a headline. If there is another Virginia somewhere in the world right now, the question is whether she will be seen, believed, and protected before she is written into a list, before she is turned into an asset. That may be the question our generation is responsible for answering.
Little blue thing on a marble floor, a little blue thing they'd seen before. Wings like paper, eyes like sky. Nobody asked her where she'd been. Who sees the blue when the room is cold? kept behind the glass cage, painted her silence, painted her flight, said, stay pretty, stay polite.
Who sees the blue
when the curtain falls?
Who hears the wings
when the verdict calls?
Nobody's flame, nobody's fight, nobody's blue in the gilded lights. Little wing,
nobody hears the little thing.
gold, 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 glass, 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 wings, wings, nothing less.
Now she's crushed between the pages, now she's caught between the ages, but the paper holds her name, and the paper holds the blame. Little blue, little blue.
Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about a story the world tried to silence. If this video touched something in your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Drop a comment, let me know you're here, because every voice matters, and yours is one of them. I'm Angel. May the light be with you.